Hey, today I'm going to go over seed starting, just a basic way of seed starting that works for every seed, pretty much. There are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, the method that I'm going to show you today will work for all the seeds that you want to start. So, the first thing you want to do is get a list of all the seeds you want to start and make a list. This is mine of the date that those seeds need to be started and how many of each you want to start. Now, if you're doing something small, you may not need to do that. But I have a lot of seeds that have to be started continuously, pretty much starting now through the midsummer is probably when I sow my last seeds. So if you're wondering where you can get the information on when to start your seeds, you're going to look on your seed packet. Now, depending on where you live, the seed packet is going to sometimes be correct and it's going to sometimes not be. So, my personal experience with stock, that's what this is that you can start it in January. However, the back of the packet says to start it 5 to 6 weeks before your last frost. Stock is extremely hardy. We had two really hard frosts last year after I transplanted them out, and they stayed green the entire time. So, some of this is going to come from experience. For the most part, you can listen to what it says on the back of your packet. So, not only are you going to get when you can start your seed, but you're also going to get information about how long it takes to germinate and what temperatures the seed likes to germinate at and what to do once the seed has germinated. So, just a ton of information on the back. You're also going to see whether or not that seed is a perennial or an annual. Now, perennials and annuals are kind of a tricky terminology. I don't like to look at seeds as being perennial or annual. I like to look at every seed as being a perennial, giving the right circumstances. So, stock is an annual where we live. So, once it's harvested, obviously, that's the end of the plant. So I like to succession plant these so that I can get more stock over a longer period of time. And so that I don't have let's see, how many am I growing this year? I think it's somewhere around 800 of these that I'm growing this year, and I don't want them all popping up at the same time. So I'm going to spread my seed starting out over the course of a month. Now, stock is a cool flower. That's something to keep in mind as well. I like to put shade cloth up over my stock because we have a short spring and it warms up pretty fast once that spring is over. That's another reason why I start these super early. And so, pretty much with all cool flowers, you can do the same thing. However, some cool flowers are more hardy than others. I have cool flowers I can start now and put out before the last frost, and I have cool flowers that can't be out before the first frost. So it's just experience and things like that that help you decide when to do those things. One of the other things it tells you to do on the back of your seed packet is how deep to plant your seed. So, basic rule of thumb is you want to plant it as deep as the seed is in size. So, if you have a small seed, you're going to basically put that on the surface of your soil. Bigger seeds you're going to put down a little bit, and even bigger seeds, some go up to about an inch or 2 inches down, depending on the seed. So, read that information. So, stock, for example, likes to germinate at around 65 to 75 degrees, and it takes 7 to 14 days. So, why do I want to know that? Because if my seed room is cooler than that, I'm probably not going to get good germination. So, I want to make sure the temperatures are ideal for that germination. And the other thing is, I want to know the time frame of that germination because if I've gone a week and I don't see anything, but I know that it can take up to 2 weeks to germinate, I know not to give up on that seed right away. So those are important things to know, and it also tells you what to do after germination. Sometimes seeds that like to germinate at a warmer temperature prefer to grow at a cooler temperature once they've germinated. So you've got to keep that in mind as well. So I know this sounds really complicated, but it's not. And once you get the hang of things and get some experience, it'll just come without thinking. So the next thing you want to do after you've read your packet and you've made your list of all the seeds you want to start is you want to do your labels because you don't want to forget what it is that you're growing, and you also want to put a date on the back. So I have most of my labels from previous years. I try not to throw away the plastic, and so I'm going to put my date on here on the back. Today is January the 8th. And the reason you want to put a date on your label is, again, so you can track your germination. So, and you also kind of want to see, you can compare, for instance, if I start a seed on this date, did it do better than a seed I started at a later date, and vice versa. So it just gives you a little bit more information to base your decisions off of in the following years. So I've got my date. It looks really bad, but it's January the 8th, which is today, and Katz Ruby is the kind I'm starting today. And with seeds, you always want to do your oldest seeds first to get those out of the way. Try to use a whole packet once you buy a packet. Seeds typically don't store well after 2 years, and if something isn't coming up, there's a strong chance that it's just because your seeds are old. Okay, so I use a seed starting mix from Johnny's, but you can get seed starting mixes off of Amazon, at your local Lowe's or Home Depot or Garden Center. But this particular seed starting mix has some nutrition in it for those seedlings. Not too much, obviously. If you over fertilize, you'll kill your seedlings. Okay, so here we have a tray full of Johnny's starter mix, and things we want to watch out for are air pockets. So I kind of go through as I'm filling and I push in on these cells, and if your dirt is collapsing in on itself, then you need to make sure that it's full of soil top to bottom. You don't want to press it in too tight, you don't want it to be compact, but you definitely don't want any of those air pockets, otherwise your seedling's gonna die. So I've got my tag right here. I'm gonna place that in the corner of my seed starting tray, and you want to make sure your soil is slightly damp. You don't want it soaking wet, but you don't want it dry either. So I know that can be a tough call to make, like when is it too wet, when is it too dry? Well, don't worry about it too much is what I'm gonna say. Put some water in there, make sure it's not soggy wet, and if you find in a couple of days when you go to check on your seedlings that none of your seedlings are coming up, check to see if the soil is dry. If the soil is dry, you can put some water in the bottom of your tray. So here's the top and there's the bottom. I put like a 1/4 inch of water in there, and sure enough, if the problem was that it was too dry, they will come up in a couple of days. So don't worry about it too much. Okay, so I have my packet here. Now these seeds are pretty easy to see. Some are not so easy to see, but I prefer no matter what to tap it directly from the seed envelope into my seed tray. So I try to aim for the middle, and I definitely multi-seed. You're gonna wanna multi-seed because if one doesn't come up, you don't wanna waste all of that time and energy on something that's never gonna happen. So multi-seed, meaning put 1, 2, 3, depending on your experience. Sometimes on the front of a packet, it'll give you a germination rate. I'm not seeing one on the front of this. Yeah, so sometimes it'll give you a germination rate, sometimes it won't. For me, stock germinates fairly well. The problem is I like to cull seedlings for double blooms, and so I like to double seed my cells, even though they will most likely all germinate, because half of them are going to be lost due to that culling. So that's a separate issue. So stock seed aren't that small. I don't know if you can see them. There's 2 right there. So I just seed them on the top. Now if more than 2 gets in there, I'm not too upset. Seeds are fairly inexpensive. What is expensive is your time, your energy, the soil, all the other things. So if you get more than the intended amount in there. Don't worry about it too much. The other thing you want to consider when you're sowing seeds is you want the same kinds of seeds to be in the same tray. Don't start one kind of seed in one part of the tray and then continue with a different kind of plant, because you're going to get all kinds of problems when it comes to watering, when it comes to planting out. So just kind of keep the same things together. Okay, so I've got a little bit of room left on this side of the tray, so I'm just going to go ahead and start my next variety because I do not want to waste that space on my seed tray. Now, because I have a date on this end over here, I don't need to put one on this end necessarily because I know they're all starting at the same time. I'm also starting a variety that is the same variety as what I've already started over here. So these are all Katz varieties of stock. We've got this full now, and I prefer to cover my seeds with vermiculite versus trying to cover them with more soil. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, I've got my seeds in there. I've got my vermiculite over the top. The next thing we want to do is put a lid on. So this lid is kind of tall. Normally you would prefer to have a lower lid because you want to get it as close to the light source as you can when the seedlings are small. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close these vents while these are germinating. If I find, in the next couple of days that it's just overwhelmingly humid in here, I'm going to open these vents and let some of that moisture out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put it under lights on our growing rack, and we're going to give it that 7 to 14 days before we make any judgments about whether or not the seed is viable. Okay, so here we have our seeds on the growing rack. Now normally I like to have my light source closer to my seed tray, but because those domes are so tall, unfortunately the light source is pretty far away. What I prefer to do is what is happening up here, which is having that light source pretty close to the top of my tray, about 2 to 3 inches. Now, once these germinate, and I've got some germinating, you can see those little tiny seedlings. Once these have germinated to about 50% to 75%, I'm going to take the dome off and I'm going to lower my lights so that they are closer to that seed surface. And then I'm going to move them off of this heat mat. This particular seed likes to germinate between 70 and 80 degrees, so I've got it on a heat mat. I'm going to move it off of that heat mat, but under a light source that's closer to the top of those seedlings. Okay, so let's talk about seed troubleshooting just for a minute. So you can run into a couple of different problems when you're starting your seeds. The first is that none of your seeds are coming up, and that can be due to a variety of reasons. It could be that your soil is too dry, in which case you'll want to add a little bit of water, like I said, to that bottom tray and give it another chance to germinate. It could be that your soil is too wet. If you notice that you have like fuzzy mold growing on the top of your seed tray, the chances are that your seed has rotted because it was too wet. The other reason could be that it's not warm enough or that it's not cold enough. Those are going to be your 4 problems. In our house, one of our problems is that the mice get into our seeds. They don't tend to like most things, but they love sunflower seeds. So I know when I sow them, you'll see a bunch of dirt kicked up. That means mice got into your seeds. But those are just some of the few problems that you'll have. The second problem that most people who start seeds face is that they get a green algae that grows on the top of their dirt. So if you see the green algae on the top of your dirt, there's not much you can do about it once it's started, but having that vermiculite on top versus just covering it with more dirt is going to help. The other thing that's going to help is bottom watering versus watering from above. Now, once those seedlings have grown a little bit and put on some stature, you can water from above, but you want to make sure you don't leave them in standing water. So if you're watering on a tray with a tray underneath, you're going to want to check it later on, like maybe half an hour later, to make sure there's no excess water in the bottom of that tray. The other thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to fertilize your seeds once a week, I'd say, unless your seed mix has some kind of fertilizer or feed in it. And then it just kind of depends on the seed and its fertilization needs. So some seeds don't require fertilization, they're not heavy feeders, while other seeds require more. I use a Neptune's Harvest. It's a fish and seaweed fertilizer, and I put about 2 tablespoons in a gallon of water, and it stinks really bad, so I try not to overuse it. So for some of these seeds, you're going to have to wait until after your last frost to plant them outside. But things like stock, sweet pea, Iceland poppies, I'm trying to think what else, sometimes snapdragon, foxglove, things like that you can put out a little before your first frost, and just depends on the seed. Like I said, some are more hardy than others, so you just got to go by your experience and what you know and other people's experience too. So that is it for seed starting. It's not too late to start your seeds this year. There are plenty of seeds that you can sow all the way through the fall. So I encourage you to get some seeds and start trying to grow your own flowers today.